brothers and sisters in recovery. Hello, anxiety warriors and friends in fitness. I'm Christopher Heimerman. This is 40,000 Steps Live. Let's get this out of the way. I am not a healthcare professional. I'm not a counselor or a psychiatrist or a licensed expert. I'm a guy with 623 days of sobriety and a story that hopefully educates, resonates, and maybe even inspires some folks. Now, I almost didn't share that story. I was worried about the whole first do no harm concept. I didn't want to drag my family back through the mistakes I'd made. I don't want to put them through any more pain than they'd already felt, and I didn't want to air our dirty laundry. But my guest tonight, Pastor Wesley Dickson, helped me get over that. He helped convince me that my story needed to be shared, that it would deepen my relationship with me and my family members, and this is what I wanted to do most, it would help people. So far, I think he was spot on. I'm excited to bring him in tonight and chat with him. Also excited we got some great questions and some stuff from our viewers. It is a great night for a run, so let's lace them up. This is 40,000 Steps Live. All right, folks, so I had to sort of re-rack my monologue this morning. I read this story on CNN, and it was breaking down, comparing and contrasting the proposed stimulus bills from President Biden and the Democrats and the GOP. Let me give you some numbers. The proposed stimulus bill from the president and his crew is $1.9 trillion was the cost attached to that. Now, in both of these plans, there was $4 billion earmarked for substance abuse and mental health treatment, more access to those treatment and services. Now, that means that 0.21%, 0.2% of that $1.9 trillion was going toward that. Now, the Republicans' bill, $618 billion. So there we're talking about 0.64% of that money was going toward more access to treatment. Now let's think back on the campaigns, shall we? Let's think back to the way that President Biden, who was very much affected by substance abuse, given the history of his son, Hunter Biden, and he called it one of the greatest challenges that we're facing as a country. And then we think about the GOP, who early in the pandemic were clamoring for us to open up the economy at whatever cost. And they said it was because of people's mental health and that they needed to go back to work. And if they didn't go back to work and be good worker bees, that they would get sad and that suicide rates would go through the roof. And look, I know that some of that has happened, but here's where you show me the money and show me that you actually want to address these problems. 0.2% and 0.64% of their proposals would actually increase access to treatment. There are a lot of barriers getting people into treatment. I got in there, thank goodness. And here's a little glimpse into my experience. The staff strung out, lacking resources. It was palpable that those folks were just getting by. And they were the ones charged with the task of helping us get right and get on the path to recovery. Now, I was in treatment for 2 weeks, and it cost us a few $1,000s. Sorry for the sticker shock, but it costs a lot of money to go to treatment. So you've got all these barriers to get people the help that they need. And when they can't clear those barriers, what happens? They twist in the wind, they get into trouble, awful things happen, they get arrested, they end up in prison instead. We invest in locking people up and keeping them in prison rather than investing in them as humans so that they can actually add to society. Instead, we subtract them from society. Makes no sense to me. Show me the money. The fallout of all of this is that we have this epidemic of shame when it comes to addiction and mental illness. That if you're battling addiction, you're broken. That you're not worth investing in. And to me, shame is much more deadly than guilt. Because there's a difference here. Guilt is what we feel for things that we've done. Shame is what we feel for something that we are. Now, this culture of shame, it worked on me for a long time, and it took me getting into treatment for me to realize that I was worth it, that I was loved, and that I was worth getting on the path to recovery. And yet this morning I read that story and I felt insulted, and for the first time in a long time, I legitimately thought about saying, to hell with it. I mean, I can't get a life insurance policy, folks. Even though I'm medicated, even though I do counseling, I'm in the best shape of my life, physically and mentally. I can run a 6-minute mile. I drive a Dodge Stratus. Ironically, the fact that I went through treatment is why I can't get a life insurance policy. It could be 5 years. It could be 10. We don't know. I'm not sure when I can get a life insurance policy, and I'm not happy about it. Stuff like that needs to change. How long exactly are we going to punish people for being something that they did not choose to be? So yeah, I mean, this is what society thinks of me. You want to see how broken I am? I mean, I'll show you. And that's where I was this morning. But you know what? I didn't pick up the drink. Instead, I wrote about it. I put my feelings out there. You can check out the blog. It's 40,000steps.wordpress.com. And you can read what I wrote about it. I meditated. I used all of my tools, and I got back into the right frame of mind. Might not be evident right now. Because, I'm pretty charged up right now because we need to get charged up about this. We need to say that this isn't right. That this stigma and all this shame, that it's not right, man. So I lived in that shame spiral for a long time, and I got out of it by going to treatment. And the weekend before I checked in, I called many of the closest people in my life, and I laid everything out on the table. And it was met with love and acceptance and concern, like legit concern. It was like, man, we need to get you right because we love you. Now, late in the summer of 2019, I was coming up on 100 days of sobriety, and I was getting ready to really put my story out there. So I came out to my coworkers at Running Awards and Apparel. And even though I was feeling rock solid, I was still terrified of telling them because of all that shame stuff. And it happened again that they were welcoming, loving, supportive. They were encouraging. Now, this was shortly after the 2019 Madison Mini in Madison, Wisconsin. And I bring that up because this was where I really turned a corner. And I'm going to show you some pictures here. I want to show you some pictures of tonight's guest, Pastor Wesley Dixon. This is going to be him with me and him and my wife and our daughters, Anna and Elise. And after the race, there's the crew. Look at those smiles, right? So after the race, I had the conversation with Wes. I was like, man, I don't know if I should do this because of this first do no harm concept that I was talking about before. I don't want to unnecessarily hurt my wife, my parents, family, friends, people who didn't need to relive a lot of that stuff. But he urged me that being honest and not having any secrets would deepen our relationships, that it would endear me more to them. But yeah, I mean, the first do no harm thing it's tricky because like right in the 12 steps of AA, step 9, made direct amends to people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So it's tricky that you don't want to do something that will hurt somebody, obviously. But in this case, I had a pretty good track record so far with sharing the story with people and it turning out well. So with Wesley's encouragement, I decided to go forward with it. I kept writing the memoir, finally finished it in November of that year, hired an editor, the incredibly talented Claire Buchanan from WNIJ, and we finished the thing, my goodness. And we, went through a number of edits. I have a memoir now, not published yet, but pumped about that. But in January, I got cold feet again, and I called up Wes, and he was there for me again. He said, dude, you got to do it. And I can't wait to talk with him about that. It's funny how in those moments, sometimes we know just who to go to. And for me, that was Pastor Wes. So we're going to have him on in a little bit. We've got some great questions to answer from our viewers. Please send us those. Send them to 40,000steps@gmail.com. Might even still be able to sneak one into tonight's show. But first, before we get to those questions, I want to talk about the DUI and Behavioral Center, the DUI and Behavioral Health Centers here in Sycamore, which is right near DeKalb where I live, as well as Plano and Crystal Lake. Now, when Ron Parch and his team, when they're helping people battle addiction and mental illness, it starts with respect. When somebody battling addiction feels seen and respected, a path to recovery opens. He and his team, they create an individualized treatment plan specifically for that person. They've got individual sessions, group sessions, Zoom sessions. They incorporate the family, which is clutch, and couples. They've been doing this stuff for 25 years. They're respectful. It's affordable. They've got offices here, like I said, in Sycamore, as well as Plano and Crystal Lake around Northern Illinois. Check them out. Go to DUIsycamore.com or call 815-895-9000, and you can set up an evaluation. Whether for substance abuse, mental illness, anger management, start there. Start with that evaluation. So write this down. Call 815-895-9000. Visit DUIsycamore.com, or you can email, as you see on the screen, DUIBHS@gmail.com. So check that out. Proud supporter of our show. We're proud to have DUI and Behavioral Health Centers here in Northern Illinois as a partner. So let's get into this next segment. Like I said, we've got a great question. We've got some awesome comments, a little crowdsourcing that we did. This next segment is called I Hear You. Let's hit it. Got a little ranty in that last segment. Got a little long-winded. So let's get right into these questions. Folks, I love when you send me questions because when we talk about this stuff, everybody wins. We bring light to these issues that nobody wants to talk about. I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot of people don't want to talk about mental illness and substance abuse. So thank you very much to Brad, who sent an email. Brad says, I've relapsed several times. Been there, brother. How do I keep it from spiraling out of control and lasting days, if not weeks? I think the most important thing is to tap into your network and your community. You know, you see it a lot in shows, and you see it for a reason, that people will say, get yourself to a meeting. Get yourself into a meeting. And for a lot of people, that is the surefire way to get right back on track. If you open up about it and you be honest with people, be it your family, your friends, get yourself to a meeting, then you have a team to get out of this thing. Because when you slip up, when I slipped up, man, I just withdrew, and it would go for days, if not weeks at a time. So I feel you, Brad, but you're asking the question, which means that you do want to stop this. So the best advice I can give you is when it happens, reach out to somebody immediately. Ideally, you'll reach out to it while you're in the thick of it, while you're actively experiencing the relapse. But if it's the next morning, just put the brakes on it by tapping into your support network. That's the very best advice I can give you. Thank you for writing, Brad. You are a genuine rock star. I put out a call to action on Facebook. I asked people what they're guilty about. I said, hey, let's kind of clean our conscience together. And I actually got some responses. I didn't know how this would go over. Let's start with a lighthearted one. My friend Natalie says, I've never read Harry Potter. And then she does the emoji. It's okay. It's okay. They're a really quick read. You should take them on. My stepfather-in-law says, I read all the Harry Potter books. So apparently that makes him feel guilty. With those jokes out of the way, my buddy Jason says, I struggle with imposter syndrome. Samesies, man. Solidarity, can relate. I know what that is because, I've lived it, where you constantly feel as though you have something to prove. And that is tough. I've been in that. I've been in that every day. So I feel you, Jason. The thing about it, I think they're probably, if you take a step back and you look at it, you'll realize, wow, I'm incredibly talented. I'm smart. I happen to know that you are, Jason. I know you. And yeah, it's tough though when we get into our own way. So I appreciate you sharing that. My friend Naomi says, I had someone close to me that needed help and I shut down instead of helping. It did not work out in the end. And I always live with that regret. And I wonder, what if I had intervened? That is tough. And I'm sorry that you lived through that, because we think about self-preservation and it's like, we can't help somebody else if we don't help ourselves first, right? So it's like, sometimes you have to sort of insulate yourself and take a breath and take your space, but you're always dreading that if you do that, something terrible could happen. So when it did, it confirms your greatest fears. So I hope that you are able to take some space and take care of yourself, because I like you said, I know that that's stuck with you. And that's the problem with being a compassionate human being and an empathetic human being, is that we do want to help everybody, don't we? So I'm sorry for your loss. My wife, my greatest supporter, says, I feel guilty when I lose my patience. Same, honey. I have an incredible temper. You know, when I go off, it's never pretty. You know that. But you are an incredible mom. You are the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And you've had plenty of patience with me over the years, more than I could possibly ever describe. So I love you very much. Your daughters couldn't love you more. You are their model of womanhood, and I could not come up with a better one. All right, folks, because I got all ranty before, we got to move this thing along. We've got Pastor Wesley Dixon here tonight. He's our featured guest. Let's get over there and chat with him. This next segment is called The Guest Room. Welcome back, folks. 40,000 Steps Live. Here we are in the guest room, and tonight we've got Pastor Wesley Dixon. A little bit of background. He worked with my wife, Kayla, in Sterling at the incredibly creatively named Wesley United Methodist Church. Wes, thank you so much for joining us. This is an absolute pleasure to chat with you tonight.
It's a privilege, Christopher. Thank you for the invitation.
So how did that work out? I mean, when you put in your application, was it like, oh, they can't turn me away?
You know, we actually don't apply for positions. We're told where to go. And so we serve really at the will of the bishop. Much like a Catholic priest, we're assigned to a location. So I can vividly remember the call where I was told that I'm going to Wesley United Methodist in Sterling.
And you're like, no, you can't write that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I thought they were gracious hosts. They wrote my name on everything there. I mean, it was on the chairs, on the tables. I mean, it was such a great place to serve.
Yeah, and I know that Kayla absolutely loved the experience. And it was so cool, sort of, being part of that family. It also didn't hurt that the church was right around the corner from our house too. So we'd walk over with the girls and we'd see you guys from time to time. Yes. And it was an incredibly nurturing and safe place during a tough time as young parents. Yeah. So, hey, let's go to August 2019. Let's go to the Madison Mini, and I'm going to show a picture of you and Kayla after the race.
Yes.
Half-marathon in Madison, Wisconsin. You guys had run races together. Look at how happy you are. And look at Kayla, and there's this sort of there's this little scotch of unpleasantness in her face. Why would that be?
Yeah.
Can you describe to me how proud you were in this picture?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's an image of one of the best half marathons I've ever run. I had really wanted to run a race with Kayla for a long time. And so the opportunity came along to do a half marathon with her. And And so when we began to have conversations about it, she was absolutely certain that she was going to break the 2-hour half marathon. And I knew that I wasn't quite trained to do that yet. And I remember thinking, I want her to start ahead in the pace where she's going to be able to succeed, and I'll just hang out behind and run my race. And so in the 5th mile, when I could see her moving around a curve ahead of me, I knew I had her. And so it was just a matter of time before I passed her. I didn't say anything on my way past her except hello after she noticed that I passed. And so it turns out I beat her. And I almost felt bad about that. So that's what you see, is the joy that I had run a good race.
You said it was mile 7 when you officially overtook her.
I passed her. In mile 7, I passed her. Yep.
We all remember when we achieved this level of greatness, don't we?
It's hard to forget.
I want to show this other picture too, because like we're from Wisconsin, and they would take away my Badger, permit if I didn't show the other picture of you guys with the coolest mascot on the block. There's Bucky the Badger. All right. Yeah. So our conversation after the race that day, I was fired up about the stuff that I was doing, but I was also scared about getting into the advocacy stuff. And I shared that with you. And, what do you remember about that conversation and the advice that you gave me? Because it was so encouraging, and I really needed it because I was starting to get cold feet.
Yeah. So here's what I remember. Christopher, I honestly did not have any idea that you had been going through what you had been. And so, even from the relationship that I had with you while working with Kayla, I knew who you were. You were the person who was married to my administrative assistant. And you were the person that was a great father to the 2 girls that were often in the office. And so I knew exactly who you were, and I considered you a friend. But I honestly had no idea what you were struggling with. So when you approached me after that race, I tend to be very introverted. And so a lot of my conversations initially are very superficial or somewhat on the surface. But when you really came out and were very honest about the struggles that you had been through, what you were writing about and what your project was all about, I remember thinking, this is a conversation that's exponentially deeper than just a mere friendship. This isn't superficial anymore. And so there's a piece of me that just flips into a different kind of mode to honestly care about, to hear the heart of the story. And then ultimately, a whole lot of who I am is to build someone up, to encourage them and to offer them support. And so that's what I remember the most is hearing the brokenness that you'd been through and wanting to encourage you in the journey ahead. I knew that was not going to be something that would be easy for you at all. But knowing who you are and the heart of your character, I wanted to do everything I could to encourage and support you in the journey.
I remember coming away from that and just feeling on fire and being like, okay, now I got this. And then, I finished writing it, like I was mentioning before, and it got to be January. And again, I kind of pumped the brakes and I was like, oh, am I doing the right thing? And again, you were there for me. And I can't possibly thank you enough, because it's funny how I kind of feel like I've found my place in this world. Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine, you didn't grow up seeing yourself as a pastor. You were going into what, information technology,
computer science.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, tell me about how you that transition, how this ended up playing out.
It's kind of a long story, and it's kind of rough, but the truth is, as I mentioned, I'm a little bit of an introvert. So I could see myself working in a cubicle, just tinkering with computers for the rest of my life. Like, that makes sense to me. Zeros and ones and reading in hexadecimal, like that stuff just trips my trigger. I love that stuff. But I really didn't want to go into ministry because I understood the pain that people go through. And I know that there's no such thing as a magic wand that can take away the pain that people are living with. And so part of my story of recognizing God was calling me to ministry is that my mother had died when I was in high school. And I remember the pain of going through that and thinking I never wanted to work with families in the midst of that kind of deepness, that kind of darkness. And so it was kind of one of those things where through a multitude of pastors who had encouraged me to consider my call, there came a distinct moment where several years after, the pastor who had done my mother's funeral said, "You have what it takes to be a great pastor," and that rocked my world. So I can remember basically, a whole bunch of sleepless nights and endless prayer, just saying, "All right, if this is really where I'm supposed to go, God, you're going to have to open the door." And that's what happened. And as soon as I said that, 6 weeks later, I was moving into a parsonage and starting to serve 2 churches at the age of 20 as a sophomore in college. So yeah, I was kind of an idiot walking into a situation that was not something that was comfortable at all, but thinking, this is really what I'm called to do. And so the best advice that I received the very first night that I was assigned as a pastor was from my boss at the time, who said, "Just love the people." And so that's been the whole impetus of ministry for the last 21 years. Just love the people.
If we could only do that with our most vulnerable in our society. And it's such a cool story. And it's so hard to imagine you not doing that, because I think about the way that you've connected with me and my family and the reverence that I've heard of members of your congregation. And it's just, it's amazing how our perception of ourselves, we don't really realize how much we know ourselves until we take a step out of our comfort zone sometimes. Let's take a moment here. I need to talk about the DUI and Behavioral Health Counseling Centers once again here quick.
Of course.
And folks, what do you have to lose? If you think that you might have an issue or someone you love does, get an evaluation for alcohol, drugs, mental health, or anger. You can do it today at the DUI and Behavioral Health Counseling Center in Northern Illinois. Depending on your situation, it might be free. If you're loaded, it'll run you about $80. That's the max. If you're a veteran, an NIU student, or unemployed, you're going to get a break. So what do you have to lose, folks? If there's an issue, Ron Parch and his team are going to use their 25 years of experience to build an individualized treatment plan that's confidential and effective. They've got offices in Sycamore, Plano, Crystal Lake, all around here in Northern Illinois. Check out DUISycamore.com or call 815-895-9000 and set up an evaluation. Whether for substance abuse, mental illness, anger management, start there with that evaluation. So write this down. Call 815-895-9000 or visit DUISycamore.com. All right, back to our conversation with Pastor Wesley Dixon. You just did a funeral yesterday, right?
Yes, I did.
This past year, you have done more funerals than anyone should have to in a lifetime. How are you handling that, and how are you managing your mental health right now?
That's actually a great question. A lot of that is the necessity for me to be to be very disciplined in my spiritual disciplines, and so I'm usually awake by about 4:30 in the morning at the latest, so that I can begin to read, spend some quality time in silence to process the day, to do a little bit of writing, just my own personal writing, nothing that gets published or anything, but then usually I enjoy a good run. That's another piece of my mental health. So even in the cold, lace up the shoes and just get out, breathe some fresh air. In the winter months, wearing a mask really helps to keep some of the warmth in. And so that has
finally,
that's been a blessing. But where possible, like if it's at all possible, I try to sneak in a little nap in the mid-afternoon just to get a little bit of a break. But otherwise, those are some of the things that I tend to gravitate to for my own mental health and for my own rest and healing.
So you're up at 4:30 in the morning, and you don't even have kids getting you up.
No. I in fact, I don't usually have an alarm anymore. Like, I just will pop awake early in the morning.
For many years, I battled that. I was like, no, I'm going to sleep in. And finally, when I surrendered and realized I'm awake early, I'm getting up. It was a beautiful thing. And we're keeping you up very late tonight. So I appreciate it. This is late for guys like us, man.
You are worth it, though.
Oh, I appreciate it.
You are worth it.
Well, how about this past year working with members of your congregation from the mental health aspect? Or, another thing I'm wondering is, surely you've had members of your congregation come to you and ask you for help in situations of addiction. What's your experience been like with that?
There are very few experiences of addiction, but a lot of it has been relationships. Like how do you connect in a time when you cannot connect? And so a lot of what I've attempted to do is just to do everything that's possible to keep people in relationship and to think outside of their own four walls. And so a lot of what I've attempted to do with the church that I serve in New Lenox is just to keep connection, to send regular emails and communicate what's going on and ways to get connected or to serve others. I found that when we serve others or reach out in love and service, there's something that happens to us. When we break out of our four walls or recognize, even if we can't get out of the four walls, because a lot of people can't, and for a whole bunch of valid reasons, just to maintain their health, etc. To know that they're not alone. So one of the biggest things is just encouraging people to write notes to one another, to make a phone call, to get connected online, like all of our services are online. I work with a colleague who is absolutely magnificent about posting little devotions every single morning during the week. And then he'll just guide through a little bit of scripture and a little bit of commentary and just offer something helpful to think about more than just ourselves. And I think that's the biggest piece of it. But otherwise, attending to the church, a lot of it is trying to think through sermon topics that are going to be meaningful or helpful to break outside of the news cycle or just the things that tend to consume us. So we've addressed topics like, forgiveness or, the vision of what genuine community looks like, or how to let go of our grudges and our anger and our bitterness, or just Sunday, a couple of days ago, I did a service on suicide and talking about the devastating effects of that and the struggle that people go through there. So it's trying to think of any way to keep connected or to provide people an opportunity to think outside of their of our feelings of loneliness or isolation.
Now, you mentioned the topic of suicide, and to say the very least, that dovetails with certainly mental illness, and oftentimes addiction plays a role in that as well. How do those situations? How do you handle those specifically? And is it I have to assume that the first time that topic came up, you didn't have all the answers for somebody. Was it a matter of sort of getting used to helping somebody through something as devastating as a suicide that's affected them?
Yeah, especially with suicide, you mentioned earlier the difference between guilt and shame, right? And suicide is one of those topics that rarely gets talked about. It gets hidden in the darkness, or it brings with it all kinds of shame. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that there's a lot of what I would call bad theology out there. I mean, there's just a lot of people that teach things that are not necessarily helpful, and ultimately that I think are not really reflective of the kind of God of love that we would believe in. And so even suicide comes out of this deep, dark depression where you feel like you're at the end of your rope, and it's hard to ask for help, and the survivors who are left behind feel so much guilt. They walk through these times of thinking, what did I do? Should I have said something? Could I have said something if I'd only known? And living with that guilt and shame is absolutely atrocious, and so just helping people to think theologically, to use the totality of who God is, or to rethink who we've been told God is, in order to cast that in a different light and to at least think differently about why we believe what we actually do believe.
When I went through treatment, I definitely had a reunion with God. Mm-hmm. Like, I was never devoid of faith, but and like the word that you've used, I've had my seasons of faith. Mm-hmm. And when I went through treatment and the months thereafter, like I was in the summer, the spring and summer of my faith and my relationship with God. Now, I'm going to guess that I'm not the only person over the past year who has felt their faith shaken mm-hmm. by the events that have unfolded. The pandemic is brutal. Mm-hmm. I think about all of the other fractures in society that have kind of come home to roost. Like, systemic racism is that foundation was laid centuries ago, and we're always going to be wrestling with that. I think about all the divisions that have become so glaringly obvious, and I have a really hard time seeing God in all of that. When you've had folks from your congregation approach you over the past year, the brave ones who are willing to say, my faith is a hot mess right now. How do you handle those people? How do you handle me right now?
So, first of all, you're not alone, right? Even I have confessed many times that there are times or seasons where I don't necessarily feel a very vibrant faith, that I don't wake up in the morning and feel this, not every encounter in silence is going to be filled with some voice from above or some sense of an overwhelming feeling, of warmth and fuzziness and, sunshine and rainbows. Like that's not it. I mean, I'm not overly preachy, but I tend to look at Jesus, who even from the cross cries out this beautiful psalm, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And yet even through this, you'll guide me, right? So like when the pandemic hit, there was all kinds of stuff floating around, like God is trying to teach us something, God is doing. And I'm like, I gave up on a faith in a God that would cause this kind of stuff to happen. A lot of that centered, again, from my mother's death. I don't think God gave my mom cancer so that something good could come of it. I don't believe in that kind of a capricious deity that had a bad night's rest and gets up and zaps people or creates a pandemic that kills, so many people. I don't believe in that kind of a capricious deity. What I see when I read through the Bible in its totality is a God who walks with us, who weeps with us, who mourns with us. And ultimately, we would seek to find the God who walks with us even through the darkest of valleys. The Jesus's teachings about I will never leave you or forsake you, that I am with you. And even when we don't feel it, then we would stand in union with every one of the great traditions of the church. People who are Catholic have these beautiful authors, the Dark Night of the Soul, or the founder of Methodism. I happen to be United Methodist, and the founder of Methodism once questioned whether or not he had any faith, and he was encouraged, preach faith till you have it. Then because you have faith, you'll preach faith. The thing is, it's not just about going through the motions, that there are seasons in all of our lives where we don't necessarily feel it. But a part of it is hanging in there, because even if we don't feel it, often it's because our emotions can mislead us. But it certainly doesn't mean that God has left us or forsaken us. It just means that maybe we're not in that place, or maybe we're in a season where we're not, where we just don't feel it. So that'd be my quick response.
It's funny how we expect to feel solid all the time. And I think that's where this past year, with so many things being just shook this past year, that I really think the people, like, I'm very spoiled rotten that I live with my very favorite people in the world. Being laid off from my sales job last March led me to the opportunity to do this sort of stuff.
Right.
Like I count my blessings every single day, and I start my day with gratitude. Guess what? It works. I'm a happy human being. But I have my off days. What I've learned over this past year is that if we can be open to the fact that things aren't going to be normal the way that they were, if we can be open to opportunities to sort of re-examine the way that we've done things, that this is our opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm genuinely hoping that when we get to something more normal than this, let's use the relative terms. I'm genuinely hoping that people will have developed an appreciation for people who have battled mental illness all their life.
Right.
Because it's funny, as somebody who's fought depression since I was like 10 or 11 years old, was when I really realized that it was always like I was sad for no reason at all whatsoever. The weird thing for me over the past year is with the pandemic and with all of the unrest and all of the, the travesties that have taken place, is I could suddenly point to it and be like, that's what's bothering me.
Yeah.
Now imagine, folks, and I know a lot of people watching the show don't need to imagine it because a lot of them have been there and they've lived that too. But some folks here, may not have dealt with depression. Imagine the immense sadness that you felt over this past year. Imagine if you felt that way for no good reason at all whatsoever. So I'm hoping that as time goes by, that we show other people more compassion and more understanding for what they're going through.
Yes.
And how do we do that though? Is it just a matter of, I asked this of all my guests, is it just a matter of like making enough noise and saying, here's our opportunity to shed light on this stuff?
To a certain extent, yes. One of my favorite passages comes out of the book of Philippians, where whatever is true or noble or holy, or whatever is just or righteous, think about these things. And far from being just pop psychology, part of where we place our mental efforts is often the things that begin to reframe our minds, right? And so what you said about being grateful is of prime importance. The way that we frame things helps us to give up on the major issue, which is control. For most of us, what the pandemic has revealed is that we want to control everything. And when the cosmic things of control are out of our control, we tend to clamp down on the things that we think are within our power. And so we become more controlling on other aspects of our life. And so what the pandemic is to release that sense of control. And to the extent that we can release control and open up our hearts and our minds to thinking how we can be reframed, reshaped, or to experience a little bit of resurrection once the pandemic is over, that's what ultimately will lead to life. But it requires that we let go of that, deny ourselves, pick up our cross, our burden, and learn to live with a whole new sense of life after we give up our sense of control.
Yeah.
I think that's what the pandemic has taught us more than anything else. We're not in control.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yes. Imagine that.
Be okay with it and things will be okay.
Yes.
Well, hey, I want to make sure that we talk about running a little bit more because we all have high hopes. You look good. Like I see in your face, you're still in good shape. I can tell. Yeah. You want to run what? The Indy Marathon this upcoming November?
Yes, the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon. Yes.
Why is that one so important to you?
Well, it's because that's where I set my very first personal best, my personal record. And ultimately, I want to beat that personal record. So that is a race that happens in the early part of November, and it's usually cold when running is a little easier and it's a lot more efficient, for the body to run in the cold. And I know that course like the back of my hand. It is a beautiful, mostly flat course. And I think even the tagline of the race is that it's a beautiful place to set your pace. And so that's what I want to do. My best marathon was 4 hours and 9 minutes, and I really want to beat a 4-hour marathon. That's my ultimate goal.
You're not going to do that at Disney, though.
No, see, Disney's way too much fun. And even in January, so I just did the marathon in Disney World in 2020, just last year. And it got up into the 80s, and they shortened the course at one point. No, but Disney's way too much fun to there's too much to see and too much to enjoy if you're doing a Disney race.
What is it? You've done the Dopey, isn't that the whole kit and caboodle? What is that?
Yeah, it's 48.6 miles, a 5K, 10K, half and full, back-to-back days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
And you sit down, at least you get to sit down on the roller coaster for a little while to rest your feet, right?
I did on the half marathon the first time I did the challenge. Yes, I did. The course ran right by Expedition Everest, and I happened to be passing through the animal kingdom just as the park was opening. And so, you know how much fun it is to do a roller coaster in the 13th mile of a full marathon?
I do not. Someday.
I recommend it.
Well, I love that you love running when it's cold out. I run hot. I'm from northern Wisconsin, so it's like I love this time. I love the fact that it's exhilarating. Don't you?
Yes. It clears your head.
Yeah, it sure does. Well, Kayla and I are looking at some trail races later this year, like I talked to you about. Who knows? Maybe we can, maybe someday we'll get you to that ultra point, to get you to the 50K. Although it didn't seem like you were interested in that.
Well, 50K seems like a little bit too far of a distance, but I'll tell you what, there is extra motivation. I mean, if Kayla's doing it, then I'd be willing to throw down the gauntlet again and just to see if she's up to the challenge.
Oh, I think that's probably a good place to leave off tonight.
And if she's listening, I'm just totally kidding. I love you. I respect you. And
I can like feel the heat radiating from downstairs right now. It's on. It's on, man.
I'm sure it is. It is.
I appreciate you joining us tonight, but in the grander scheme of things, I really appreciate you for what you've meant to me and my family and what I know that you mean to your congregation. You put so much love and passion and compassion out into the world, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Christopher. It's been my honor to be with you tonight.
All right. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Folks, let's reflect on this show. Did a little ranting earlier. I think that's why it was good that we had Wes as our guest tonight, because that was such a pleasant way to end things. But he gets the guilt and shame thing. He understands that there are certain things in our society that need remedying. So as time goes by, let's make sure that we're making some noise. Going back to the whole stimulus bill thing, write your legislators. Let them know that money needs to be allocated for people to be able to get help and to get better, to get healthy, so that they're adding to society, okay? But I want to leave you on this note, folks. We are going to be having Jada Butler, my psychiatrist. She's going to be coming back on the show soon. We have a lot of, I want to work more celebration pieces into this. I have a couple of brothers in recovery who are going to come on here and celebrate their sober anniversaries. Let's take the opportunity to celebrate each other, shall we? That stuff is contagious. When we put good into the world, it has a way of fostering more good and multiplying. This just popped into my head. In an interview, somebody said that their email is like gremlins, where you get it wet and her email just multiplies. Let's do that with good, shall we? Let's put some good out there and watch it catch and watch it multiply. All right. Well, thank you for joining us as always. It's been an absolute pleasure, folks. Thanks again to Wesley Dixon for joining us as our guest. Folks, remember, if everything feels like it's falling apart outside of these walls, outside of the show, just remember, in here, we are always coming together. Love you very much, and we'll see you soon.